Hi everyone, my name is Anna Kutkevich and I'm a senior project geologist in the Vancouver office. I will be taking you through the webinar of starting your Leapfrog project off on the right foot or Metre. So we're going to cover everything that you need to get started, all the way from creating a new project, importing data, correcting your errors, into a very important step of setting up your drill hole database, getting it ready to create your model by grouping, merging, interval selecting, and then a couple tips on creating your model. New project, just a couple of quick tips. The first thing I want to point out is how to save your project. With the new wave of file sharing platforms and remote working, you'll be tempted to save your project straight onto one of those, like OneDrive or Dropbox. But we don't recommend this because, as you know, Leapfrog projects are saved as you work. So that means that all those files need a constant, steady, uninterrupted communication between the project and the project files. So when you put it on something like a network or a server, you can just increase the likelihood of that getting interrupted, and then that's going to create problems for you later on. Another tip is to take advantage of the notes feature in Leapfrog. So I'm just going to switch over to Leapfrog here to show you this. So in the projects tab, maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't, but when you hover your cursor over the thumbnail, it's going to tell you any information that you've written in the notes. So this is a very nice way of cleaning up the names of your project. You don't have to be overly descriptive in the project titles. You can add your notes there, and that's done just by opening this guy, the notes at the very bottom of the project tree. Just kind of a simple text file, testing out an option there. So you can make comments here. No need to save, you just close that, and then those will appear when you hover your cursor over that project here on the Projects tab. Not really a project if you are using Central, but if you are using Central, take advantage of the description field within your Central portal. That's going to help you find or just give you a little bit more detail about the projects. Another consideration before you get started is just how are you going to construct your workflow? How are you going to structure your projects? Are you going to model everything at once, or are you going to break out a bunch of regions to model separately? So I don't have any rules of thumb here. It's very much a case-by-case basis. It depends on geological continuity, density of data, project scale. So just consider how you'll be breaking out different projects and branches so that you can merge them together efficiently later. And finally, Leapfrog is unitless, so make sure all your coordinate conversions are done beforehand. Let's talk about importing data, and we're going to talk about drill holes for this section. So I just mentioned Leapfrog is unitless. We'll talk about survey, less is more, data type, all this stuff I'm going to bring up just by opening Leapfrog again. Okay, so I've started a new project called New Project. I'm just going to go ahead and import my drill holes here. Okay, so I'll grab my collar. All right, Leapfrog is unitless. So let's revisit this topic by looking at our collar file. It's got multiple different coordinate systems, so make sure you're choosing the correct one. I want to stick with the UTMs here. Also, just want to make sure you're bringing in the correct fields. So I have 2 depth fields, also have 2 different elevations. So make sure you are choosing the correct one here. Survey type. There is a little tick box on the right-hand side here that says negative dip points down. Leapfrog will look at all your data, and if most of them have a negative sign, it will automatically tick that. It depends on your project, where you are in the world as well, so another thing to consider. Okay, I had a note in there that said less is more. That means that once you bring in a column, you can't remove that column later on. So less is more. Make sure that you're not tempted to just click on import all columns and then decide later on, I don't need this sample ID field. It's just good to start small and then import more columns later. Okay, and then I had a final note about data type. If you look at one of these dropdowns, you'll see a bunch of different data types. Very common question is, what is the difference between these top two? So they behave almost exactly the same way. Anywhere where you would pick category, you could also choose lithology. Generally, I will choose lithology for actual lithology, and then anything further like weathering or alteration, I might pick as category. But the only difference that you'll see in Leapfrog is the overlaid lithologies option, and that's over when you're working in the drill holes field. It does have to be lithology. How about text? Do not bring in your modeling field as text because you won't be able to model with it. Text should be used for long description fields like this guy over here. Anything that I don't want to use to model, but I do want to be able to just observe as a piece of metadata when I click. I'm not going to import that guy. And then the last one I have here is URL. So this is going to link me to my core photos. We do have a tutorial on that, so get in touch if you'd like a copy of that. And then finish. Cool. Correcting those errors. So the first thing you can do is just a nice visual check for errors, make sure that nothing looks crazy wrong. If it's dipping the wrong way, if you've got a floating drill hole, just look for consistency. So I'll switch back to Leapfrog to talk through that one as well, since I've got another tip for you. To show this, I'm just going to bring in my lithology, a bit easier to see, and bam, I mean, I clearly have something incorrect there, especially noticeable when I put on my topography. Another visual check that you can do is load your collars into the scene and then use your home key or the look reset option, and this is going to zoom to the extents. And I'm doing this to see if I have any coordinates that are way out of whack, and I actually do. I've got a couple points over here that are sitting way far away from my data set. So if I go to that table, I can see that they're actually at 0, 0, 0. So you might choose to ignore these for now, maybe look them up later. I'm going to ignore those. And it's nice to do that because you'll notice that Leapfrog creates some kind of automatic default resolution when you're modeling. It does that based on your data extents. So it's best to just refine it down to the area that you're working with. I'll flip back to topography briefly. So you want to just do a check to make sure that your holes are sitting as expected with topography. We do have an upcoming webinar all about topography, how to fix your errors, how to look at workflows like this. I'm not going to stick too much longer on that topic, but it's something to check out. So I'm leaving this drill hole up here because you should never correct your errors within Leapfrog. So I could open the collar here, make a change, but always, always, always correct your errors in the database and then reload, because you don't want to propagate errors downstream. All right, let's talk about fixing the errors. So errors in Leapfrog are split into two types. So we have warnings and errors. Warnings would indicate some kind of data inconsistency, like missing data. It'll also highlight a wedge hole or a redrill. We do have a blog upcoming about wedge holes, so keep an eye out for that. And then errors. So errors are duplicates, overlaps. The main difference here is that errors have to be addressed. So if I have 2 points that are duplicated, Leapfrog will ignore both of them. Okay, so you need to make sure to pick the correct one. Same thing goes for some kind of interval overlap in lithology. Maybe you have overlapping intervals there. You need to fix that up before you can use them and see them in the 3D scene. And then Missing intervals and missing values. So I have a screenshot here showing those guys. Really important that you understand the implications of replacement behavior. So if I've got missing values and I decide to replace them with a low background value, that means that my interpolant or any kind of numeric model that I create will be cut off in that area. So it's going to say that this area has no grade. So you might do that if, I don't know, maybe base metals you only assay with visible sulfides. So that's one option. The other case is maybe it's a missing value just because the core was lost. So it could be grade. So in that situation, perfectly okay to omit. So it really just depends on the situation. I will just switch back to Leapfrog to show you another quick note on those errors and overlaps. And I'm going to be looking at lithology here. So I'll fix errors and I'll look at my little overlapping segment here. So I have a clear overlap where it was logged from 131.19 to 135, and then the next interval starts back at 133. That's WP009. So I can locate that guy in the 3D scene. Oh, I actually just see it now. There we go. Actually, I'll make a query filter for this because that's another just tip if you didn't know. Best way to find a hole is just to write a quick query filter for that guy. And then you can apply that to the table. There we go. So let's see, the interval in question was 131 to 138. Now, this is a good example of Leapfrog omitting both of those. So in this case, nice that I have my core photo link all ready to go. I can click on that file and it's going to pull up my, my little core photo here. And this just allows you to verify, okay, you know, that contact should be at, let's see, where are we working with? 133.6 is the correct contact. So always correct it in your database rather than correcting it here in Leapfrog. So I'll just ignore that for now. Okay, the fun part, and I think this is very important, is setting up your drill hole database. The goal is to have a model ready column, and it's all about giving yourself flexibility now so that you don't have to go back and redo work. Yep, so the goal of this database is to have that model ready column with built-in flexibility so you can make interpretations and relogging calls on the fly. So the Leapfrog approved workflow method is to group, then merge, and then do an interval selection. So let's go back to Leapfrog for this. And let's look at our data here. So I'll clear my filter, turn on my legend, get rid of my caller. So let's take a look at our data. Now this data set is one that I already know that I want to group. It's still pretty straightforward, but ahead of time I already know I want to group it. But sometimes you don't know this until you start modeling. But in order to give yourself the flexibility, always group anyway. So you might say, well, how do I do that if I'm not actually making any changes? It's grouped rock. Just move each of these over by themselves. So make a new group of each item all by itself. And that will allow you the flexibility later on to very easily come back to these and make any grouping adjustments that you might decide. So I didn't make any changes to the codes. I just set myself up to have the flexibility later to just go back into my group field and make a change. So maybe I decide that, you know, in fact, I actually want to group all of my E units. Very easily, I can just return to this page and group these. Cool. Okay, the next step is merging. So you might say this seems a little funky, but if you've ever encountered issues using your interval selection, this is for you, because merging your table first will allow you to make finer, more precise adjustments and allow you to split lithologies when there was not a break previously. So maybe you're using downhole geophysics to make corrections, or assays, or simply just looking at the core photos. That's one case where you would want the flexibility of additional breaks. Now, I'm going to come back to this, come back to why. So I'm just going to go ahead and make that merged table, and then make an interval selection. So I'm going to make a new merged table, choose my assay, and then I'll just choose my grouped rock field. And I might choose my core box photo. I might use that later. And I'm going to call this merge lith and assay, something like that. So merging is going to create one table that has all of the elements that I've selected, and it's going to preserve every single break. So whenever there is a break in the assay table, it'll appear in this table. And then whenever there's a break in the grouped rock field, it will occur in this table. So that's a throwback to that flexibility field. Okay. So now that I've merged, I'm going to go forward and create an interval selection. And then I have a couple of notes here just for setting yourself up for interval selection properly. And your first thing is to choose the correct base column. So when you right click on your table, create a new column, new interval selection, you're going to get this base column option where the first dropdown will say none. So you want to, in order to answer this, you want to consider what it is that you're modeling. Are you creating your own brand new categories based on interpretations you've already theorized, or are you going to be making adjustments to existing lithologies? The answer indicates your base column type. But otherwise, if, say, for example, you're starting out with lots of really old historic logs and the codes are all over the place and you're just doing a whole revamp of everything and defining your own codes, in that case, you would choose none. Another note on the name. So you may have actually seen that I called my merged table merged something. I called the grouped table group something. I like doing that because most of the icons look the same. The icon for a grouped and for an interval selection look the same. So I just like to include the word selection in interval selection, just to make it easier to pick from the project tree. Okay. All right, so I've got my merged table. I am now going to choose interval selection. And then for this one, I am just going to make a couple small adjustments. So I'll choose my grouped field as the base lithology. And I'll call this selection. Okay, now this is where why we merged becomes more obvious. So I'm going to focus on just my day site unit. And let's see, bring on the right table, that'll help. So I talked about how giving yourself flexibility is really important. So at this stage, maybe I've already gone ahead and created a model and I've used my interval selection as the base lithology. Since I have interval selection, I have that flexibility to go in and make changes on the fly and let my model be updated. And then another example I want to point out is this interval here. So maybe I'm creating a vein. I know kind of what this day site looks like. I think this is a bit of a strange interval. Maybe it's quite thick. I'm also going to throw in my drill hole graphs. I'll just put my gold on there. So I'm focusing on this real small one here. And I want to highlight that I know that my dike is a late barren cross-cutting unit. So the fact that I've got grade in that unit is again a bit strange. So maybe I want to break this guy up into smaller intervals. Now I would not be able to do that had I not merged my table. But now that I can, or now that I have merged it, I'm able to switch my field to say gold. and then choose more refined fields here. So I have the flexibility to pick each of these guys. So again, the difference, if I flip back to my selection field, I can only select this entire unit. But if I move this back to my gold, I can more closely select out those units that I want. I think I'll pull up my little core photo again here for some help. And yep, it looks like there's a contact at 111.3. So kind of right where that grade dies down. So now that I have that selected, I can assign this back to what it should be, which is early diorite, and then save. There we go. Oh, and I'll grab this one too. Okay, so it's all about flexibility here. Okay, now starting your model, last stage here. So this is just a couple of quick tips. Setting your base lithology to the correct modeling field. You can still access other tables once you set your base lithology, and then just add lithologies as required. So I'll show you that in a moment. Consider a resolution that might be on the high side. You don't want to fall down to really small triangles right away if you're not sure exactly what's going to work out for the model. General rule of thumb, whenever you half your resolution, you're going to increase your processing speed by 4 times. So it's going to slow down quite a bit. And then snapping. Think about snapping and how it doesn't have to be turned on right away. Maybe take some time to create your surfaces and then turn on snapping as needed basis. So maybe if you're modeling a thin vein, turn on snapping there, and then also consider things like how accurate are your surveys? Are your holes surveyed? Okay, so let's set this up. So we're going to create a new geological model and then make sure that we're choosing the right field here. So I want my selection field. And then resolution 200 might be a bit big, but I might start at something like 20, maybe just drop it down 1 order of magnitude. Take advantage of this enclose object dropdown just to snap yourself into a nice, more refined area. And off you go. So once you're building your lithologies, you will be able to just choose your base lithology off the bat. But if you do find that you want to reference another table, you can very easily access that with the other contacts field, and then just choose another field from your drill hole data. And off you go. So that's pretty much everything I have for you guys. I do want to mention that we're putting up a lot more online material for you. We have a lot of remote training opportunities. So you can check out our website for the latest webinars and blog posts. And we also have a lot of online learning opportunities on my.sequent.com. And then, of course, we are still doing remote training. So please reach out to your local team for remote training options with a live trainer.